Welcome to the Sounds of Encouragement, the place for creatives to find encouragement and support to help you stay motivated, creative, and inspired to use your craft to more fully impact your community. Thank you for tuning into this episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you get notified of future episodes. If you find value in these podcasts, please share with friends or colleagues. To keep this production ad-free, please share your support at www.buymeacoffee.com/encouragement and share a one-time gift or check out the member levels. I'm your host, Melissa Slocum, and I thrive on encouraging other creatives through teaching music, small business coaching, podcasting, and so much more. Find out more at www.musicgrow.com and subscribe to be part of a growing creative community supporting one another. Don't forget to check out the links in the show notes. And remember, I'm here for you, so you can be there for those who need you the most. Enjoy the show. Welcome to part one of this two-part episode with my friend Lauren Best. This episode might be a little different than most episodes that I produce. This interview or this conversation is a bit like the creative life. It wanders a bit. We go down rabbit holes. We explore so many different topics in addition to encouragement. In some ways, this is like a meta discussion that talks not only about the practical and the daily stories of living, but also the philosophical, and considers so many different questions that are relevant to our lives as creatives and as human beings. I hope that you will appreciate and enjoy this wonderfully deep conversation. I know for me, I described it as like a warm hug to have this type of wonderful conversation with a fellow creative, where we could bat around ideas and just ask more questions than come up with answers. And this is part of what I love about doing this work, is being able to explore questions in deep ways, which is part of what I so enjoyed about my conversation with Lauren. In this conversation, this first half, this part one, we talk not only about the creative life, but about birth, about grief and death, about our bodies and body movement and our voice, about social sharing, and about not apologizing from the stage, and so much more. I hope that you will enjoy part one of this two-part podcast episode with Lauren Best. And when you finish with this episode, check out her websites, and don't forget to check out part two. Thanks for listening. Lauren Best lives where the Pottawatomi River meets Georgian Bay, on the territory of the Saugeen Ojibway Nation, now known as Owen Sound, Ontario. She is an interdisciplinary creative with a multifaceted community arts practice, interweaving her work as a poet, musician, and composer-creator. Lauren left her small Ontario town as a young singer-songwriter keyboardist and returned to become Poet Laureate Emeritus of Owen Sound in 2017 to 2019. Lauren is included alongside other Poets Laureate Emeritus in the City of Windsor's South Shore Collection Series, A Manor of Words, Poetry at the Manor 10th Anniversary Anthology. Her poems are also published in Spike, Poems in the Time of Pestilence. Lauren's 2010 chapbook, Resound Re:*Sound, is a collection of lyrics written in Owen Sound between 2004 and 2008. Lauren's music has been heard coast to coast since her debut album release in 2011, and she's collaborated across genres and art forms with work in music, poetry, theater, film, and digital media. During more than a decade of community-engaged arts, Lauren has partnered across sectors spanning education, cognitive neuroscience research, healthcare, social service, and cultural organizations. In 2022, she teamed up with Seattle-based saxophonist Steve Tressler to create the Infinite Improvisation podcast. Lauren's new performance pieces combine poetry from her first full-length poetry book, Just Leaves, released in 2023, set within a soundscape of keyboard and vocal improvisation paired with lyric melodies. Please welcome my guest, Lauren Best. Welcome to the Sounds of Encouragement. I am your host, Melissa Slocum, and you just heard a little bit about my guest, Lauren Best. Lauren, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do this because we know each other through a mutual friend, Steve Tressler. Thank you, Steve, for all your great work too. But you and Steve started a podcast together and about improvisation. And I was really enjoying that particular project and that podcast. But that was how I got to know a little bit more about you and your work. And then, of course, you came out with your book of poetry, Just Leaves, which we're going to talk about today. And as I've just gotten to know a little bit more of your work, I was so excited about talking to you, not only about your work, but about what keeps you positive and moving forward and how you've stayed encouraged through, so many things going on in the world with the pandemic and things in our personal lives too. And I know you've gone through a lot as well. So I'm really excited to dive into this conversation today. I really like to start with what encouragement looked like in the past for you. And I like to learn a little bit about who were the encouraging people in your life? What were those encouraging pivotal moments? And what did that look like for you when you were, maybe growing up or going through school or as a creative and as an artist? What have been those people and those moments of encouragement for you?
I loved, knowing that this question would come up in this podcast and listening to some of your previous episodes. I just loved having a chance to think about that and return to some of those moments, both in terms of feeling what it's like to remember people who've helped me along the way and, to think, wow, guess it was worth it. Here I am today,
Yeah.
to think about those small bits that really add up
Mm,
to something larger, and then help me try to have positive impact on other people. And so I was particularly thinking, as a voice coach, people who have helped me with my voice along the
yeah.
way, as a singer, as a podcaster,
Mhm.
as a communicator, right? That's,
Yeah.
I guess, my dad said I never met a mic I didn't like. I guess I've always had been able to get right up and close with the microphone and to
Yeah.
to sing or to speak or to speak with people I don't know very well, but it hasn't always been easy, right? Like, just because I always had that willingness,
Sure.
um, you know, it might be called a willingness to suffer a little bit, right? Like a willingness
Sure.
to it's a willingness to have the thrill of visibility, right, in a
Yeah.
performance, or but even just in a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Sharing about myself and my journey, even if it's not a recorded podcast conversation, right?
Mhm.
Um, a willingness to have the thrill of that, but also a willingness to have the discomfort and to make mistakes and
Yeah.
to keep, growing and learning, especially when we're at these stages where we see where we want to go and we're
Yeah.
not quite there yet. So we need to continue on despite knowing that what we're hoping for, what we're aiming for, that it hasn't yet been achieved, and that can be tough if it's something that we care a lot about. So I was thinking very much about how it's taken so many people along the way to get me
Mhm.
to this point where, I mean, I've been a voice coach for a long time. I've definitely been able to help empower people vocally, while I've still been learning. Um, Even when I was still a high school student, I was doing things to um, around interactive arts and around organizing groups of people together and organizing concerts and organizing a cappella singing groups and things like that. But I was still very much in my own learning, and I needed so much help after that too. So, from the vocal coaches and teachers and music teachers and people who helped me with songwriting and piano and all those people contributing to my musical journey when I was still a young person, and I've helped young people with their musical journeys now, and I know that it takes patience, right? It's a long game. It takes a long time to encourage young people, and so I'm so glad that people invested in me for that long game, particularly my parents, of course.
Yeah.
But especially more experienced vocalists and actors, and some of what really helped me along the way wasn't necessarily a music teacher. It was sometimes in the theater and improvisation world.
Sure.
It was sometimes classroom teachers who I was working with as a teaching artist or artist in the classroom. And I was also thinking how sometimes it was people who weren't necessarily connected to my creative journey in the creativity, although collaborators also comes up. The line between collaborator and mentor is not always a distinct line as well.
Right.
But I was also thinking about like body workers of different kinds who've helped put pieces of the puzzle together. And I really see that as an important form of encouragement, because when your body isn't supporting your creativity the way you want it to, it can really be inhibiting or a source of suffering, right? And knowing that, being able to help figure out what was going on in some cases. I've had some bouts of tendonitis, and that's been top of mind lately. And some of that didn't have anything to do with music. It had to do with postpartum tendonitis and having a baby and typing and walking a dog and driving stick shift and doing all kinds of other cooking and all kinds of other things. But it really impacted my creativity or my creativity, but also my craft, right? And it can feel frightening and discouraging, and you aren't sure what to do. Like, you aren't sure how much you can keep asking your body to work for you and your creativity versus how much you need to just tend to it or give it some time. And so having expertise of people who weren't necessarily musicians themselves or creatives themselves, but were there to support me and to let me know that it's not something I need to let kind of pull me down or weigh on me. It's something that can be understood and can be worked on.
I'm so glad you bring this up about body work and movement, because it seems like this is becoming more emergent at least in our industry of musicians and musicianship. I'm not sure how much it's in the overall creative landscape, because I have also been exploring how to heal a rotator cuff injury with my I'm not doing traditional medicine and surgery. I'm exploring, have had a lot of other great options. And so as part of my recovery, I'm also rehabbing all of my technique and working with a great Taubman teacher for piano. And just last night, I did a Feldenkrais movement class with a wonderful expert. And so I am also in this space where I'm realizing, years and years and years of creative work does take a toll on us physically. And I don't think we talk about that very much. And it's interesting because then also this morning, I just had a reminder too from another colleague who talked about the creative work and how wonderful it is, but how physically taxing it is on a person, in their body. Whether it's singing opera and being into the emotional, mental headspace of the character, and then the physical toll that takes on the body. And I don't think that's something that we really recognize very much. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think we are starting just now to figure out and discover that this attention to our physical bodies is so, so important. We can't abuse them forever.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you bring up the opera world because I think I was introduced to a deeper level of body awareness and of body care through the theater world as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
through the music world.
Yeah.
Um, which now, and I say this not as a criticism for the musical experiences I had, but now as a facilitator, practitioner, coach, I think that voice is a movement practice
Yeah.
because it is a movement practice. I think,
Yeah.
music is movement practice. It's
Yeah.
integral. Like we are hardwired for singing and sound making and mimicry and for movement in the same ways. And it's, it can be very intuitive. It can, on one hand, be more intuitive than people think. It can
Mm.
be, like I said, more hardwired than
Yeah.
I think a lot of people believe who maybe don't have as much musical experience as they would like. I think they don't realize how close it is to being able to just reach out and take for themselves. Or
Yeah.
by take for themselves, I mean experience and
Right. Right.
enjoy
Right.
themselves. But
Yeah.
by that I mean claim.
Yeah.
Um, because it is very intuitive. But then on the other hand, um, like we can really expand our awareness and we can really solve or influence or it's not like, oh, my technique's solved, right? But
Right.
we
Right.
can really change what we're doing so that
Yeah.
um we aren't necessarily at as much risk, or that we can
Mm-hmm.
have more resilience, or that um we can just train for what we want, right? Like just like we can
Yeah.
train. And I know you know this, but I've been, not coming from an athletic background, I've been so interested to learn about the idea of athletically training for more specific things, which I
Mm-hmm.
kind of knew, but I hadn't really thought a lot about. Like I knew you could strength train, of course, right?
Right.
But
Right.
I wasn't thinking to myself, like, am I training strength? Am I training power? Am I training speed? Like, what am I training here in the same
Yeah.
way as I would have thought of those sort of things musically or creatively? And so I find it so interesting to be able to think about training and improving ourselves, right? In ways that have nothing to do with talent, just
Yeah.
have to do with getting our body being able to support us in the way we want it to, right? So we support our body, it supports us. Because I've found it's not always necessarily like, oh, I'm doing all this grueling work and I hurt myself because I'm just,
Yeah.
working so hard. There have been
Yeah.
times
Yeah.
where it is because I'm doing more physical output or trying to do it too quickly in a
Mm-hmm.
compressed time because
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling short on time. So I'm sometimes literally just acting in a rushed and tensed way,
Yeah.
right?
Straining.
In subtle ways. I'm straining or I'm pushing or
Mm-hmm.
I'm holding, clenching.
Yeah.
um, but sometimes it's just I'm having too much fun. Sometimes it's that, like I was preparing for a gig and so I played a bunch of guitar and I had such a great time. I was like, oh, I haven't practiced like this in so long. This feels
Yeah.
great. Like
Yeah.
I'm tired, but that's okay because wow, this is great. But like taking it a little too far,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and because I either haven't trained to then have that much fun,
Right. Right. Right.
like what people say when they play like a pickup game of hockey and then they're
Right.
having a hard time, right? You haven't been training to have the
Right.
fun, or because I haven't, because I wasn't acting with awareness and subtlety, and in my own practice as a coach or facilitator or teacher, I find so often, and what I learn from by helping other people with, it's about
Mm-hmm.
exploring subtlety more, um be, taking time to see what happens when we slow down, when we notice more, when we expand our awareness, when
Right.
we
Right.
decrease the demands so
Right.
that we can really have, in the end, a fuller experience,
Yes.
not just to not hurt ourselves, or not
Right.
just to
Right.
make ourselves be able to work more, right? Because
Yeah.
like that's something important to think about too, like how much do I want to expect of my body and of
Right.
my
Right.
and my mind too, right? In my career, my creative practice, and what do I want to plan for?
Mhm.
Like doing poetry readings is a lot less demanding for me than practicing guitar or piano on a physical preparation level.
Sure.
Um, yeah, it is, that gives us a more whole, more rich, and more embodied, joyous experience, I think,
Yeah.
to be able to work with that subtlety and awareness.
You know, there are so many intersections, and one of them that I wanted to kind of circle back around to, I've heard a lot of creatives who have talked about, you know, a lot of creatives have a very similar story in their life. Not all, but a lot. And it goes back to encouragement. And you mentioned, you know, looking back on life, you can see all the people and all the moments of encouragement, you know, from parents to teachers to voice teachers and things like that. But was there ever a moment as you were, you know, growing up and going to school or even choosing a major in college or doing whatever you were doing where somebody said, you know, this isn't going to really sustain you. This isn't really going to work. You can't create a life doing this. Did anyone ever kind of give you that and kind of force you to question, can I really do this and make a living?
So sort of the opposite of encouragement
Yeah, yeah,
in terms of raising doubts.
yeah,
I mean, I think that's happened so many times. I wouldn't think of one pivotal moment.
yeah.
I think that uh, it's I, I especially because I started very young in
Hmm.
terms of performing. I mean, it's all relative, but it's not like I was a full-on grown-up, like
Right.
sure of where
Right.
I was going. And
Right.
then I started like, doing poetry and music. And so
Right.
uh I think actually quite often, if I'm chatting with people, people would say things like, well, there's no money in that,
Right.
or oh, that's so rewarding. It's not a very stable career, but that's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
or they'll have a story about a family member or a friend
Mhm.
who, oh my, like my brother played drums for a while and his band toured, but
Yeah.
he had a family to support, or
Yeah.
it just got like there's just I often think whether people who are in other careers or who are in other who aren't creatives get that kind of feedback
Yeah.
on, like, I just have been told so often that there's no money in it, it's
Right.
hard.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways I wish I could go back in time and be like, oh well, I've had a career and supporting myself and my family. And it's funny you
Right.
say that, because I know so many people who are able to
Mhm.
exist and be in this world. But I think also people open up to me in ways that are vulnerable as well. As much as I
Mm.
get some surprising comments, I still actually have had people directly say that they don't think there'd be much demand or much need for voice coaching. And I'm like,
Oh,
every
wow.
single person has,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
all have
Yeah.
voices.
Yeah.
Every person. um which, it's a way to, like, actually that's good, like that particular comment. I found it doesn't bother me because I don't need to convince someone who says that to me otherwise, right?
Right. Right.
um it's like I'm okay with not convincing everyone of what
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
or feel. And I'm of course happy to have conversations about it and happy to learn, right?
Yeah.
I've also had feedback that was insensitive, harsh,
Sure.
in some cases may have had some truth in it, right? Like sometimes you get feedback on your creative work
Yeah.
that is true for that person,
Yeah.
but is like in some ways could be helpful, right?
Mhm.
But it's communicated in a way that is not,
Helpful, not kind.
it's just rude,
Yeah.
right? Like that is just
Yeah.
rude and not very kind. Um and sometimes it's been for people who like could have easily been more kind.
Mm.
I actually had
Yeah.
someone once say that, not directly to me, but that it was the wrong voice singing the wrong music. And I think they said something else was wrong too. But I think that having some of that sort of, like, maybe you just shouldn't do this feedback, right? Because like I
Yeah.
have had some feedback that is kind of along those lines. And I think I've also had feedback from people that is equally or more effusively positive.
Yes.
And I think, especially over a long span of time, right? There's been times where I've had effusively positive feedback that I don't even believe myself,
Yeah.
just as I may have not, whether some of the negative feedback, did I believe it? Did I not?
Yeah.
Was it helpful? Was it not? It's a little hard to say, right? Because I also know that some negative feedback I've received, like I improved a lot, but some of that positive feedback too, especially over time, and like you as an educator, facilitator, like you've definitely made an impact on people.
Yeah.
And it starts to be so much can't you can't ignore the positive side of what you're hearing as well.
Yeah. And I think that's a great kind of segue into that next question about where do you discern, or how do you discern someone's expectation or a layer of expectation when you're not sure if you're hearing their encouragement to do something, and it's true encouragement, or if there's a layer of expectation kind of rolled into that encouragement. Because I know I've had situations where I hear something and I'm like, oh, that's really encouraging. And then an hour later, I'm like, no, that's not encouraging at all. It's really just someone else placing another expectation on me of what they want me to do. And I've had to really work to kind of navigate that or discern that. Have you had that happen? And if so, how have you discerned that difference?
Well, I realized I don't need to be all things to all people, but I realized that people may want me to be things I don't want to be to them, right?
Yeah.
And that it can be, it can be complimentary, right? If someone wants you to, and so I think I've had to relearn this many times. I used to do more, or I used to do some freelance communications, arts administration kind of thing, right? And I reached a point in my creative journey, where it just didn't make logistical sense because I had other things I was doing. And I realized to continue doing that work, even if it really helped the people I was working with, even if it helped me in some ways,
right,
it meant I wasn't able to do as much direct teaching or facilitation, or and then at other seasons in my life, doing one-on-one teaching has meant I'm not able to do as much group teaching or as much writing and creative work, or it's taken time to realize that I need to decide, and that may require saying no sometimes. And it's tricky, right? Because there have been times where I really, especially I think in a creative career, it means so much and you want to be able to share that as much as possible, right? Because for me, I know the positive impact, like I've talked about, that I've experienced myself. And it helps me speak about what I do in passionate ways. I'm happy to talk to people about it because I believe that creativity and music, and especially voice work, is just really like integral to being able to discover more about who we are, to being able to connect more with other people, as I was talking about, to sort of allow for greater understanding and greater richness of experience, and whether that is for personal private reasons or whether that is to be in a better mood and to feel more energized for those around us, or whether that's to get up on stage because we want to challenge ourselves and it's really hard and it's going to be something that's like a pressure cooker to help us, or whether it's to get on stage because we want to be on stage with friends or be in theater production. There are so many different reasons, right? But I believe that there's like a fundamentally enriching thing we got going on here. And so it's tough not to engage in the ways I might be asked to engage, and to have to pick and choose what is strategic when, especially with changes in my business, changes in my creative focus, changes in the amount of time I have, right? Or my financial situation. Like at different times I have to make different choices. And I think moving to teaching online and then staying online and not returning to teaching in person.
Right.
I still will do events and
Sure.
workshops and things like
Sure.
that, but I felt a tension where people were not happy about the
Mhm.
idea of people staying online. Like
Yep.
there's this kind of like pushback, and I really saw and felt it, that like they wanted me to not be online, you know?
Yes.
They wanted something different, you know? And I was going to do what I was going to do, because
Yeah.
there were other people who weren't online, if that's what they wanted. And even though it was a little easier to see when it was something that wasn't as integral to sort of the purpose behind my work, right?
Mhm.
Where I was like, this is a logistical detail that you care a lot about.
Right.
And
Right.
I care enough about, because like I'm making choices for an overall
Right.
business strategy, and
Right.
what is personally viable for me.
Yeah. I love that you talk about and mention that you have come to a place where you don't have to be all things to all people. Because I think in order to get
Mm-hmm.
to that place, you do have to know who you are and what you're here to do and be clear about what your voice is and what it's meant to be used for and what it's not meant to be used for. Because if you don't have that clarity and if you don't have that level of understanding about yourself, like if you haven't done that work,
Mm-hmm.
in your own identity, and if you haven't done some of that work around, what am I here to do? And what is my purpose? What is the point
Mm-hmm.
for this moment? Or even for the next 10 minutes. If you haven't done that and explored that, then yeah, you're going to try and please everybody. And that's the, I think, part of the mentality for a lot of creatives and artists, is that they have to be mass marketable, and everything has to be scalable, and everything has to be, appeal to everybody and palatable for everyone. And I'm sort of like, nah, I'm not, that's not me, first of all. But I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what sets you apart, like a lot of other creatives that I know, is that you are not willing to sacrifice your craft for some notion of scalability or mass marketability or some who knows what, whether it's fame or money or success or whatever. It seems to me that you do have a clarity and a knowing about yourself, about what you're here to do and what you're meant to do. Maybe not for your whole life, but at least for this phase of your life.
Well, I really appreciate that. It doesn't always feel that way.
I know, I know.
I was gonna say, sometimes it feels like the sacrifice comes on both sides.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, but I think that is part of the beauty in it. Like I was kind of saying, like the thrill and the suffering.
yeah,
It's both sort of part of it.
yeah.
It doesn't always feel like I have that much clarity like you describe. However, I think that drives me to do the best I can, to sort of be clear enough to be aligned. Or I mean, I do think about some of the things you mentioned, but
Mm-hmm.
again, it's to a point, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
balancing that with my other priorities and with the purposes I have.
right.
Um so it's a bit of both. I think it's sacrificing enough that things can continue to make sense for me, right?
Right,
In
right.
terms of lots of different things. I mean, there's so many ways to create and ways
Yeah,
to produce and ways to
right.
connect and put things out there. And so I believe that if I do that in a way that is, I wouldn't use the word authentic. Like I'm not thinking how can I be most authentic, but
Yeah,
like I kind of figure
yeah.
out what I need to prioritize and what I'm willing to sacrifice on both sides, and then try to kind of walk down the middle of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
In
Yeah,
terms of
yeah.
and and I think when you were talking about being clear on our voices, and I think actually working with people with their physical voices,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that it's never just about the physical voice. It
Right.
often has to do with, well, why are you even here with me getting my help for your voice? It's
Yeah,
already your voice.
yeah.
You can, so why are you here with me? And sometimes that in the first place requires some figuring out. And so it's really, think about who's encouraged me. Like it's really been such a gift, the people who have allowed me to encourage them, or who have
Yeah.
come to me for encouragement. Because I mean, I notice things in myself, but also I notice things kind of in the world, right? I notice things that may not be exactly parallel to my own journey, but really influence my way of being. And as you were saying, sometimes that's around, what am I expecting of my voice? And when I say that, that could be the physical voice, but that could be my creative voice, or that could even be like my inner voice. Like, how do I even expect myself to think and talk to myself, or, and it can be the way I'm speaking and as I perceive that. And as the person who is listening perceives it, but those are not the same, the same things.
Right.
And so clarifying, like, what expectations do I have around the kinds of sounds I make and the kinds of things I say with those sounds, whether that's like emotionally conveyed, right, or whether it's like through the actual words. Because you can make whatever sounds you want, right? It's just like, what do you make those mean, and what does everyone else make those mean? So that can, that can be about style, and or that could be about technique, or that could be about production and and recording process, or that can be about, it can be about song selection, or it can be about writing the song, or it can be about writing. I find people want to talk to me about podcasting, about their writing projects, and their voice as a writer. And poetry, of course.
I love this.
I find it.
Yeah, I love the way you think, because, and this is part of why I wanted to talk to you, because I'm sort of the same way. And I'm like, am I the weirdo? Is it just me that thinks about these things? Because there is a sense of playfulness, not judgment, but there's a sense of playfulness that I get from you about all these things where, it comes from a seat of curiosity. It comes from a seat of, what can we discover? What can we learn? What can I be open to? And I feel the same way, when you mentioned being encouraged by the people we serve. I had an experience last Friday with a 7-year-old, and I was like, well, gosh, I walked away from that lesson, I think, a better person, because of a 7-year-old, and so I love that that is something that you are also aware of, and that you think about, and that you are willing to say, I'm creating this space that is open and free from judgment, and we're just going to be curious. We're going to ask questions, we're going to play, we're going to explore, where does this come from? We're going to just ask good questions and have fun, as opposed to follow some pedagogy. Not saying pedagogy is bad, but follow some strict procedural thing, right? Or have to be locked into, this has to be done this way. Like, this is how teaching is. This is how this vocal work is, or whatever. I love that you're just so much more open and so playful.
Well, it's been hard won. And I say that, I think I do have a sort of, I think some of that is out of the box. Like, I do think I do have, or at least, from my like upbringing, or from my experiences, I think there, and that includes actually, maybe not totally out of the box, like through both creative experiences and other experiences, I think that there is a certain energy and playfulness that either comes naturally to me, or I love to tap into. However, the opposite, I thought to myself last night, or maybe I heard it or read it somewhere, that no, I did. I read it somewhere, but it really stuck with me. And that is, I am a paradox, not a contradiction.
Oh, yes.
And that the equal opposite to the playfulness and curiosity can be, and I don't often talk about this because, of course, I want to encourage others. I don't, it can be, you don't want to tell them the world of music is full, or the world of, voice exploration, or even personal development, right, is full of embarrassment and anxiety around your progress, and wondering whether there is just some inherent flaws that you can never overcome, and and a certain level of despair of being like, well, I just need to recognize that, like, I kind of suck, and like that's just something I'm gonna have to come to terms with, and just like there could be a lot there. It just really, like, nasty in my mind.
Yeah, but I find actually, I know this has been true for myself. The most hopeful, encouraging stuff, whatever that might be, is hard won because you cannot have that, or that cannot exist. Light cannot exist without darkness. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, the hope, the encouragement, the positivity doesn't exist without having had trauma, without having had suffering, without having had other experiences in life. And that is,
Mm-hmm.
I think, rings true for a lot of people who are some of the most encouraging and hopeful and light giving and life giving people that I know. They have also gone through some really great suffering and some great trauma. Um, and that kind of leads me into the next question too about 2020 pandemic life. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we lost so much as a world, and
Mm.
obviously was a hard time for a lot of people. What kept you creative? How did you keep moving forward? How did you stay positive through 2020? How did you get through that time in your life?
Well, before you asked that question, I was thinking about what you said about sort of the playfulness,
Mm.
perhaps being, I'm not sure if the opposite would be the word I'm looking for, but a counterpoint to the procedural or strict experiences
Mhm.
that people have. And specifically have had around music. And I hear this a lot
Yeah.
from people,
Yeah.
including people who I've just met. Speaking how I was saying that people are often very vulnerable about their musical
Mhm.
experiences with me as a stranger when they first meet me, because I think in many cases people have been waiting
Oh, sure.
years
Yeah.
to tell someone
Yeah.
there's a part of me that I lost and left behind because of, the piano teacher that told my mom
Right.
I didn't have any potential when I was in kindergarten, or the teacher
Right.
that told me to mouth the words and not sing, or hearing people, well, with this time. But what I was going to say actually is that the opposite of that is then the hope that comes from that. Hearing people say that I was at a choir camp this summer, and I was doing some leadership and giving some talk, some workshops, and some coaching. And hearing people say that they, for difficult, painful reasons, did not sing until they were in their 30s or their
Wow.
40s or their 50s, and then they came back to singing, and there they were singing with people of all different levels, being conducted by professional conductor, having
Mhm.
now at this point, someone told me that they hadn't come to singing until their 30s, but then they're telling me this having now sung for 30 years, and that
Wow.
people are able to, after having that heartbreak really around their creativity, or their body's capability, their voice, their
Sure.
dreams, their
Sure.
enjoyment, right? Their
Yeah.
and their ability to be with other people in creativity and music. Um, that was all able to change for them.
Yeah.
And some of the most devoted singers I know are people who have come to it later. And so thinking about, I when you said that, I said, I wonder, because I often feel that I need to be very loud about the revolution in music education that I think we are
Yes.
experiencing, which
Yeah.
really is just a letting a, not throwing it all out, but letting it
Yeah.
go as the only way.
Yeah.
That I think it was sometimes implied or directly told to people in the past. I think that's changed a lot.
Yeah.
Um, and kind of a coming back to, as I was saying before, the innateness of music and creativity.
Mhm.
And I wondered, would I be as excited about that and as loud about that? And would I, have invested with the same kind of sort of grit, like a bit of a digging my heels in investing in my own creativity, if it wasn't for having had some of those more stricter procedural experiences, as
Yeah.
well as having really remarkably creative experiences as a young person that many people don't get to have. And I am
Yeah.
very blessed and very privileged to have had those experiences.
Yeah.
But I wonder, right? And I
Yeah.
wonder for 2020, because I think I already had a lot of opinions and thoughts around that, right? And I'm not saying it's just rebellion, right? But it kind of does. There is, being a little oppositional to sort of entrenched authority, right? Or
Mhm.
questioning and wondering and saying, could this be different, right? Like who is being served and who is
Yeah.
benefiting? And I'd already had some experiences that had left me sort of a bit shaken, right? Thinking, um, like who do we turn to as allies, as individual creators? Like,
Yeah.
do we keep trying to make it work in the nonprofit world? Do we keep trying to make it work in the for-profit world? Do we, is like, where are the answers? And I think that despite the, there was a lot with the pandemic. There was a lot that for
Yeah.
me personally that wasn't related to lockdown or to to kind of what was happening in the world, but it
Mhm.
happened just to be happening at the same time for me. And I think that the backdrop, and of course it was foregrounded for all of us, but kind of I couldn't have it always be foregrounded. So letting
Right.
that become a backdrop,
Right.
and then having had some of these experiences that had been sort of shaky, right, in terms of purpose and creativity and the powers that be, right? I think it did help in a way, uh, because I needed to find more of a steady core, right? So
Mhm.
I think it helped with connecting with with people who were further away, literally further away. We wouldn't be having this conversation if not for Steve.
Exactly. Yeah.
Steve has been a very encouraging person and a
Yeah.
really like wonderful collaborator. We
Yeah.
definitely met specifically because of all that, right?
Yeah.
Because of sort a different kind of emergent culture around
Yeah.
that was already existing, but changed
Mhm.
and things started to really come together in a different way,
Yeah.
and remote collaboration was happening before. I was doing it before, but I don't think that Steve and I would have necessarily found each other and started the Infinite Improvisation podcast
Yeah.
had it not been for that. And I mean, again, that was not necessarily at the beginning, but I see, like it kind, things led there, right? Some of the big
Yeah.
changes, as I was talking about in my own business practice, which is part of my creative practice, um, and as I for professional practice, that's the term I was
Okay.
looking for.
Okay.
Um, because I see business and entrepreneurship as a creative journey as well, right? That's why I said my business practice in terms of that creative journey, also
Mhm.
like my professional practice in terms of how
Right.
I serve
Right.
people.
Right.
Um, it's, yeah, it all tied together. I think on a very simple level, it was also my family, my kids,
Yeah.
um, connecting to nature a lot, connecting to reconnecting, right?
Mhm.
Um, it, I was pregnant in 2020. So that was, that
Yeah.
it was a time of like literally reconnecting
Yeah.
to not only myself, but to like the women and people who have brought us to this point of being um, quite dramatically, for me, where I was better situated in terms of my knowledge and my support systems and um, the statistical chances that I would die in childbirth.
Yeah.
Like I was in a really good position compared to so many women in the past.
Yeah.
Um, and that was actually a bit of an awakening around. I'd had postpartum tendonitis before that, with my eldest, and I'd kind of thought at that time, why don't we talk about this? Like
Yeah.
you know, I know because I've done a lot of early childhood music and singing with babies and moms, and I thought I haven't really had conversations about this with other moms, but I'd learned that some of the hormonal changes in our body tend to increase swelling, and so it really like increases the chances that you will get tendonitis or similar issues. And I thought, wow, this is weird that this was actually a simple solution, a common problem, and why didn't I know anything about it?
Yeah.
And I've actually since talked to pianists who know many other pianists who also experience postpartum tendonitis.
Oh, wow.
Like when they had their babies, that's when they started realizing, or old injuries would flare up. I mean, I know a lot of musicians in general who've had these issues.
Yeah.
So I'd already kind of had some of those thoughts, but then 2020, having my second pregnancy, it was a whole other awakening. And it was a bit more of a sense of, why aren't people more pissed off? Like, how do I walk through the world knowing how much women and children, and therefore everyone, because everyone came from someone who birthed them, and that it really struck me that the majority of people who I would be talking to about this would either have their own difficult experiences or would have had in their own birth, their mother may have, had a difficult experience. And if not, they know someone. And myself, I had in some ways very idyllic experiences, but it just really made me more aware, right? Of the tremendous injustice that has happened in the past, well, for a very long time. But I'm still thinking about that these days. But I think, I know that's not very encouraging. You're asking what encouraged me during the pandemic.
I appreciate that. No, I appreciate that because I remember when lockdowns happened here, I was my kids were middle school and high school, and my daughter in Girl Scouts, and I was a Girl Scout leader. And I remember being online with my Girl Scout leaders and my Girl Scouts in those first couple of weeks. And I said, this event in our lives is going to shine a light on so many inequalities. And you're going to start to see things unravel. And that's just how things will play out. And it's not like I'm some, all-knowing, fortune-telling anything. It's just I knew that this level of experience around the globe was we were going to see some stuff as a result of lockdowns and health. I knew healthcare, I knew race, I knew socioeconomics. I knew a lot of things were going to start to really bubble up. I just know that as a student of history and social change and sociology. And so a lot of people were like, no, it's not going to be so bad. And I was like, maybe not for you. Maybe not for you. But I agree with you. I think that we did get quite a few lenses clarified during that time, during the pandemic, where we got more light shown on different things that we needed to be aware of and needed to wrestle with, and that we're still wrestling with.
And I think it, from like in that specific example I gave, I mean, it gave me a chance to do things differently and to change things around, really integral things to how we eat as a family and how we talk about food and interact with food, and some big changes, some, slow, more subtle changes, and how I, as I was saying, my relationship to birthing changed, and my relationship to mothering changed, my relationship to other mothers and birthers changed, and my relationship to my own mother and my grandmothers, and my understanding of community around children. It was a lot of learning really quick, and it was bumpy at times, and there was also a lot of grief in the world, but we had some deaths in the family and
Yeah.
deaths in the community in 2020, and also in this past year.
Yeah.
Maybe in 2022 and 23. I can't think right now whether
Yeah.
those were big grief years, but
Yeah.
I think the process of grief is also a teacher and creates a richer experience of love and presence, and a deeper attenuation to those cycles of
Yeah.
birth and death. And like and I often people will say that they experience death differently around the time of being pregnant or giving birth, or
Mm-hmm.
just that they have a big death in their life happen, or
Mm-hmm.
a big grief process around that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
um and those things certainly, like, it's not like there was like a snap of like a magic encouragement here and a magic
Right.
encouragement
Right.
there,
Right.
but this sort of the shades and colors that I was experiencing through that time
Yeah.
um were big teachers. And there's definitely, it wasn't just 2020, right? It took a
Yeah.
long time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think for myself, at least, I sometimes want grief to be quick and perfect, right? And
Yeah.
efficient. And
Yeah.
grief is not efficient.
No,
Grief
not at
takes
all.
its time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
And
and not only do we want it to be efficient and to be over, but a lot of us would rather just ignore it and push it away rather than actually embrace it and try to learn from it. So I love how you use the word teacher as you express what you've gone through, because I think when we're constantly pushing it away, that's where again we get these physical symptoms. When we're pushing the grief down, when we're pushing it away, it's got to go somewhere. Our bodies are so great at holding on to
yeah.
grief and anxiety and stress and despair. And I love that
Mm,
you have been able. For me, that's where the positivity or the encouragement comes in, though, is that you're able to say, "This has something to teach me. I don't know what it is."
mm,
But I'm going to be open to it and I'm going to allow myself to move through the process, however long it takes, no matter what it looks like.
mm,
I'm going to move through it. And that takes a lot of
mm.
courage.
Well, I think my body didn't give me a choice at
Yeah,
certain
right.
times.
Right.
Like, it's interesting you say that. I don't think I've talked about this publicly before, but I found that times where I thought, oh, like, I'm done with grieving, I did that. Grief is done. Good.
Mm.
you know, I found there were times where I would say, oh, like, I'm not sad, I'm not depressed, there's nothing traumatic is bothering me at all. There's just no reason why I can tell I'm in so much pain. Like, I could tell
Mm.
that, that I had psychic pain. I could tell that I had
Mm.
like physical difficulties, or and energy level difficulties. And I think connecting to the postpartum experience, and of course raising awareness of postpartum mood disorders, is something that is important.
Mm-hmm.
I found that I had an awareness and being checked in and screened for postpartum mood disorders so often, because you are in every appointment, right? Every
Yeah.
healthcare
Yeah.
professional you talk to,
Yeah.
every support person is overtly screening you. Like, not even, they will ask you direct questions that are screening questions.
Mm-hmm.
um and I felt a lot of pressure to be okay. And I actually went through big grieving
Ah.
processes in right after uh, the birth of both my kids. Actually, one of my step siblings passed away after the birth of my eldest, and my
Oh my
another step
goodness.
sibling passed away after the birth of, and my close childhood friend after. Well, no,
Wow.
while I was pregnant with my second, and
Wow.
not after his birth. And I felt um not a pressure from others necessarily, but from within myself, to
Mm.
be like, I'm okay. Can't you tell I'm okay? I'm clearly okay. I'm doing all the okay things. And yes, I was obviously in a lot of pain grieving, but it's
Yeah.
fine, can't you tell? And that
Yeah.
there was some truth to that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not that I was in total complete
Right,
denial
right, right. Right. You were
necessarily.
functioning. You were functioning. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And you know, and there is something to be said for encouraging yourself, so to speak. But as you were
Mhm.
saying, I think there's also uh I think me today versus me then, I have a different understanding of how to have a relationship with the grief and how to have a relationship with myself in that and with the people who I've lost within the grief. That within the grief is like an opportunity for a new kind of relationship with that person and with the people that you are connected to
Right.
with that person. But that, as you're saying, through kind of not allowing that, or this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There were some other complicating things that also made things difficult. You know, there's grief, and there were other difficult circumstances too, because that's
Sure.
life.
Sure.
But that I felt it later. Like I by not feeling it at the time, feeling that I
Yeah.
didn't have
Yeah.
time or energy or money or capacity or
Right.
like whatever to feel that at the time, that like I it was like physically feeling it later,
Yeah.
you know, in
Yeah.
terms of that, like how you described that it was like a very strong, very physical, very unavoidable
Yeah.
kind of aftershock or after effect. And yeah, I mean, I think I knew about that, but just because you know about it doesn't mean, you know, that you see it in
Yeah.
yourself or for yourself. It took me a while to figure out that that's what was happening.
Yeah, and I do think there is a special kind of pressure on, soon to be mamas. When we are pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
it's all about what are you doing to take care of the baby? What are you doing to take care of the baby? What are you doing to prepare for the
Mm-hmm.
baby? What are you doing to prepare for the birth? What are you doing to prepare? It's like,
Yeah.
uh,
Prepare your
uh,
support system.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
there's so much focus on what are you doing for the baby, that I think that there can be a
Mm-hmm.
lot of pressure on and attention, which is warranted, but sometimes we skip over the part about actually how are you doing as a human being? Just you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and we know you're
Yeah.
attached to this growing human inside you, but how are you?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that
And I
gets
think
left behind.
and I think as entrepreneurs and creatives, also there's like you know, similar to how you know, a new mom doesn't want to. I mean, I think nowadays there's a lot changing in our culture where it's like, you
Yeah.
know, it's okay to say you're tired. It's
Yeah,
okay
yeah, yeah,
to you know, not really be feeling it on a particular
yeah,
day. Or you know, I think
yeah,
that's changing. But especially having been an entrepreneur through some of
yeah.
that, um, you know, like you don't want to be sharing publicly about
Right,
really difficult emotions and then being like,
right,
but trust me and buy from me because I'm
right,
going to encourage you and I'm going to
right,
help you and like I'm going to inspire everyone.
right.
And then like I found it difficult to like to share publicly and
Yeah,
almost for not just for that reason, also around like just things I would think differently of now. Like it felt difficult to share adjacent to other people also
yeah,
suffering, right? And
yeah,
it felt
yeah,
there are lots of different reasons,
yeah.
you know, or to share. Am I grieving fairly for all the people that
Mm,
I have? I didn't share when I was grieving that person, and so what should
mhm.
I like? How many memorial posts do you do over as the years go by? Like,
Yeah,
am I
yeah, yeah,
forgetting those people? Anyway, there was
yeah,
just
yeah.
and also as a creative performer too. I think that there's the entrepreneur side of things, and again, that also that culture, people are saying be authentic, like share what's really going on, build in public, you want to share your struggles. But actually specifically, like when I was talking about tendonitis, so I had too much fun practicing. I could really feel it in my body. I had
Mhm.
this gig coming up, and I was like, this would be great to share about, to talk to other people about, some of what I could have done to prevent it in hindsight,
Right.
And I thought to myself, yeah, but I don't want to be at a gig and have people know I suffered to get there, who are watching me play and just trying to enjoy themselves. And
Right.
and again, I could have shared, I could have not. I decided to share later about it and not share at the
Right.
time. But I think that's part of it, right? Like you go, the opera singer, right? Like if if you heard an opera singer say that they were like struggling with the part emotionally and that their
Yeah.
voice is like really having a hard time, like I not that it's wrong or right to share that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you shouldn't share
Yeah.
about that, but it's going to change how you feel as someone
Right.
who is engaging with that creative work, or as someone who is like, the producer or the director, or making it happen.
Right.
And I don't know what the answer to this is. What do you think? Because I think it's sort of, has anyone ever told you don't apologize on stage?
Oh, well, you haven't said that to me, but I've known that for a long time.
Like people have, yeah, that, I mean, people have said that to you in the
Yeah.
past, not me,
Yeah.
but like I remember someone saying that to me when I was
Yeah.
young, and it has really stuck with me
Yeah.
because you can acknowledge that something happened without apologizing, but something weird happens when you
Mm-hmm.
actually apologize, even if you
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge the same thing.
Yeah.
There's something that, like, it's like the audience is open to you and you have a responsibility, and if you apologize, or there's certain things that, I know rules are made to be broken, there may be exceptions to this, but in general, like, it's really served me well to remember that. And I literally had a time when I was young that I train wrecked at an open jam. It was just the
Mm.
whole band train wrecked. It happened, right? It was my
Yeah.
first open jam. I
Oh.
admired the people there. I wanted it to go so well.
Oh.
And it was just so disappointed. And I held it together and I went to the car and just cried and just like, like
Yeah.
sobbing over it,
Yeah.
just because it's stressful. It's also like a physically stressful thing, right? Even if you can
Right.
mentally explain it. But I knew not to apologize from the stage about it, or
Yeah. Yeah.
not to kind of bring that energy to the stage. Anyways, why am I talking about this? What do you think? Like, is this in the same category as apologizing from the stage? Like, saying you're struggling preparing for a performance feels like apologizing from the stage to me. If I'm doing it like on social media or whatever, it feels like I can talk about it, but after. What do you think?
I think I'm in the camp right now of there's a lot I don't put out on social media. I don't First of all, I don't think people actually care. Secondly, like I'm also always like, the other thing that was ingrained in me is somebody always has it worse, so like if I complain about having a bad
Mm,
day or something, like what do I have to complain about? I'm a middle class white woman,
mm,
born in
mm,
America. What do I have to complain about? Right. So I'm also sort of like,
mm.
how much validity is there to me sharing anything rather than just keeping it and dealing with
Yeah.
it? Because um, I, and I just had this experience yesterday. So I will share this. I was in a cranky, cruddy mood and I wanted to complain and I wanted to write this angry blog post, about our music profession and some things that I've seen. And I happened to I've found Trevor Noah's new podcast. And so I'm like, oh, I'll listen to that while I'm banging away. And so I'm listening, and he's talking to Dwayne Johnson, and they're both complimenting each other and talking about, putting light and positivity in the world, not negativity. And I was like, oh, like I'm just gonna stop what I'm writing. I'm just gonna stop, because they're exactly right. There's so much that we can put out there that is not encouraging, that is not, like, it might be the real. It might, like, I might be cranky, I might be frustrated about something, and I might want to rant about it, but the world doesn't need another rant.
Mm.
So how can I approach the
Yeah.
same thing but in a different way to build people up? And it totally changed now the focus of the blog post that I'm
Mm.
writing, to say this, I, Am I going to share that I was angsty and that I was going to write this in a totally different way? No, I'm not going to share that publicly, although now I just did. But, I'm not going to share that as part of the blog post, or I'm not going to share that on socials, or I'm not going to share why I was so in a mood. But I think there are times when it's okay after the fact to say, hey, this was really what was happening behind the scenes. Like, this is what I was going through when this all was happening. That to me is okay. But I agree with you. Like, apologizing from the stage is not really a good look. And the same thing with our social media.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you talk about the like, what do I have to complain about? And I think a lot about that. And I think that has actually held me back from posting things that would be useful to people.
Yeah.
And also depends on the context. Like, we're having like a meta sort of conversation about the situation. So I think you sharing there will be, I mean, it was helpful to me. And so I'm sure will be helpful to someone else. Cause, I think sometimes we think that we're the only one that has a bad mood sometimes. Not that you think that. I think that sometimes. I think, oh, everyone else is happily working away in their businesses or their creative practice. And it's just me that's whining and complaining, you know? But specifically, especially with music, it's like, wow, people pay me to do this. That is incredible. I have one, and I am happy to not sacrifice everything, not to, not sacrifice in every circumstance. But I know that there are some positive and negatives and, some struggles, and that especially when it comes to something physical, when there are people who aren't allowed to sit down at their jobs, even though they could sit down to do their jobs because of corporate policies that don't even make sense, like that aren't even necessary,
Right.
It's, I think, I do think twice. And I think in some cases, though, when something, I think about all the times that I've gotten down, or even if I'm not, even not I'm feeling down about this, but I'm feeling perplexed, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling unsure about what to do, I'm feeling maybe a bit like confused, like, did I even actually hurt myself playing guitar, or was it something else I did, or was it, and I'm feeling embarrassed that I didn't practice more sooner, because that would have meant I was better trained for that moment, that I was stronger, that I was physically more prepared. And so, like, there's also an embarrassment, right, of like, I knew better. And I knew better to be more aware. I knew better to be more prepared. I knew better to take it easy. And I still, still did that. However, I think, man, over so much time I've had those experiences. Maybe if I do share it later, like I am now.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll write a blog post about it or something. When it is after the gig, I think it's also a little different because it's a different point in the story, and I can say, hey, the gig went well. I didn't have physical problems there, partially because I hurt myself far enough in advance that it was an ideal preparation, but it was some, right? What did I do that worked? That was something that helped me, etc. Right? What did I do that I could have done differently? And so, like, I may, for that particular thing, I might unpack that in a blog post because it's so specific to how I help people. But I hear you that it's very, it's tricky.
And I think context is important, because to share with the audience immediately is one thing. That's very tricky. But to share after the fact with a group of colleagues who have been there, done that, that's a safer space, a safer context to share that stuff in, because they'll get it, like I get it, because I've done the same thing, where I botched a duet performance, unfortunately, with a student one year at a recital. And, I didn't say anything at the time, because I was like, well, I better be able to take my own advice, because I tell my students, if something goes wrong in the recital and the wheels come off the train, we just keep on going and we don't worry about it. We all have bad days. So I try to take my own advice. And so I didn't draw attention to it, didn't get upset about it. Later on, talked with the student about it, and we agreed, yeah, that was kind of a train wreck. And it happens, Later on, I could go back and reflect with another music friend colleague. Wow, this is why this was all happening. This is what was happening behind the scenes. And yes, I can cut myself a break in front of the, the audience and my student, but you know, this is why all this happened and here's what I can do to prevent it in the future. Maybe, you know, life happens. But yeah, I think context is also important. Timing and context, I don't think we talk enough about, and especially in the performing world, you know, because there's a difference between performing and being performative. And there are so many people who are interested in being performative and putting their stuff out there as a performative action. And I'm like, it doesn't feel quite right to me either. So you know, I think that's a great question that we could spend a whole episode on, actually, and bring other people into the conversation about how much do you really share? Because again, I struggle with that, and with that idea of authenticity. You were going to say something, though. I'll let you go ahead.
I think it has to do as well with our stage demeanor, you know, our stage presence.
Yeah.
Even if with a specific apologizing example, like, and if it's warranted, listeners, if it's really, 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 really warranted, maybe do it. But if you're doing something on stage that warrants an apology, it might be something that's worth reflecting on and apologizing later. And that's what I was going to say is I might like post about something if I really made a mistake. I didn't realize that was offensive to someone, or that something I hadn't been aware of. But I was going to say that it's like, how are we curating that experience? Part of it is when we're on stage, but part of it is before and after we're on stage. And part of it is when you're setting up before anyone even gets there. And part of it is, I think nowadays, how you're communicating publicly leading up to that performance. And you can, when you're talking about timing and context, you can contextualize a performance for people very differently based on how you are communicating about it online. And I think in this specific case, I think there's times where it makes sense for me to share about preparation. And I debated this one, but I did realize that if people realize you are suffering towards a goal that they are the beneficiaries of, it can be a bit of a guilt, a bit of a, I don't know, like there's a difference between like suffering, like I'm practicing and it's, I don't know, practicing isn't totally suffering, but you know, like it sure is hard to schedule in this practicing, or like, you know, this is taking a lot of time or whatever, versus like, wow, I ended up in pain and worried about my body and I didn't mean to, and that was a whoopsie, but maybe other people could learn from it. But I realized that, and actually did talk to someone about it, and they were kind of like, oh, and I thought, oh, other people would worry about me, and they would, even if they don't feel guilty, they have like a sense of, is she okay? I don't know. And I'm like, guys, I've dealt with this so many times, you don't know, you know. But again, for that context, it's tricky with socials because like I don't know every context that people will be listening to this in or viewing something in. I once had someone indicate that they believe that one should not, or one might choose not to like celebrate too much on socials, even because it might be so FOMO inducing to other people that it could be akin to bragging, right? Like where's the line between celebrating and inspiring other people? Which I definitely have gotten so much out of other people's celebrations. Sometimes I don't even comment or engage or like participate in their celebration or in their story, like in their telling of their story, and it still like impacts me and inspires me in really real ways, and sometimes changes my actions in really real ways, versus like, you know, this is like again the opposite, or the you know, the paradox or contradiction, right? Versus when could that be too far and too much and becoming like deliberately sort of influencer culture style, like aggrandizing or like misrepresenting reality to other people in a way that is meant to make people feel you know, less than, or is coming from a different kind of place, coming maybe without positive intentions.
And it's so funny because we all have triggers, and you never know, you know, what's going to trigger someone else. And I love that you bring this up because this is not at all part of the podcast, but maybe someone will find this helpful too. Because I think what you bring up is so important about social media. And I think, you know, everybody goes through this, whether you're creative or not. I I had no this idea of not over celebrating on social media wasn't really a thing to me until my daughter was a senior in high school, and she was she was dealing with so much in terms of her autism spectrum disorders, and she was struggling in so many ways and with so many layers of stuff that senior year. And there were a couple points in time where I was like, I think we can get her to graduation, but I'm not really sure she's going to graduate high school. Like, there were moments where I was like, we're not really sure because we're not there, and I'm not really sure. And so I spent that year watching all these other moms post on Facebook. I'll call out the Book of Faces for this one. Posting, all their graduating seniors and all these pictures, and celebrate 10 days of, your senior or whatever. And I'll admit to feeling like, ouch, that hurts. Because mine might not cross that line. And that feels hard. Just for me as a mom. And I can't, like, it was hard for me to like those posts and love those posts because it was like, man, I have my community, I have my tribe, but it's hard. It's hard to see that. And so I never posted anything, for her, even though she graduated. Yay, we got her across the line. It was like by the hair on her chinny chin chin, but like we did it. And she's fine and it's okay. But I'm also now like very sensitive to that. Like, there are so many children that we are not celebrating. And so I don't want that to be a trigger for someone else. And it's like, until you go through it, you don't know. It's just like, unless you've had a miscarriage or a stillborn, you don't know how those announcements and congratulations can trigger someone. So it is a hard thing to navigate. But at the same time, and this gets, I do believe this gets back around to teaching and the creative world. We have to be working on our emotional IQ and our emotional maturity so that we are not judging other people for what triggers us. So as a teacher, I am constantly working on my own emotional development, my own emotional well-being, my own mental capacities, my own mental health, so that I am not placing my limitations, my stuff onto what I do as a teacher with my students of any age. And so I think that while we have to be aware of the social media stuff and it comes into play there, I think it also comes into our classrooms, our music education classrooms. And I think it comes into our private one-on-one teaching and our private one-on-one coaching and all of what we do. When we have a very small emotional IQ, it shows up, because that's where I think we see the rants or we see people get triggered and then make judgment statements too. So that's my little sermon about emotional IQ.
I so much. I appreciate you bringing up there. And I often think sometimes as a parent as well, but I think about this as a parent, especially because of my professional practice, how what we share also communicates implicitly what we value. And I think in the classroom, I noticed that, right? Especially with how we give feedback, right? And who we celebrate and who we don't celebrate. And I think that there's a tendency in art forms with a performance outcome to celebrate performance outcomes more than other outcomes at times. And so, are we celebrating the ideas and the progress along the way, or, the breakthroughs along the way? Or, I mean, some of what has stuck with me most about children I've worked with is sometimes where they shared something with another student about where their feedback was so beautiful to another student, or how they described what they felt and imagined and noticed in their body as they were playing, or
Yeah.
And again, that's not to not celebrate performance outcomes.
Right.
But I've noticed it's impacted with my own kids. Like, do I share about something that was competitive? Because just because my kid wanted to challenge themselves with a competition of some kind doesn't mean I think that that is more valuable than had they not done that. It's up to debate. And I don't necessarily think that that is what like all kids need to strive for or whatever. I think there can be a lot of actual problems with it and like actual downsides, as well as there being some upsides. And so I think, and again, this is not like judging like whether other people do or don't share, you know, but I found I have an idea of what sits well with me and what doesn't. And when I had students that say did a competition, especially if they're when I was teaching young students, sharing about adults and celebrating adults online, I treat a little differently. But I sometimes wouldn't publicly celebrate that student because who am I celebrating them for? And again, this is not to throw shade towards other teachers. There are like, it's context and timing, like it's part of a much bigger whole. But I was very conscious of elevating a student who had chosen to compete above students who hadn't chosen to compete, because there are lots of reasons for that initial choice. And then elevating a student who like achieved a particular rank or mark or result in that competition, because it's not necessarily reflective of even who's putting in effort or who, like, you know, who's deserving. It's not always so clear. And so I've been very conscious in terms of, and I'm sure there's times where, you know, where I have to, where I either compromise or I slip up or I may contradict that. But it's, as you were saying, both not being triggered or not being offended just because I feel a certain way, not making that for everyone, right? But also kind of being clear with myself about, you know, as much as I can share and what do I not want to share and what is implicit in that, in what I'm sharing or in the way that I'm sharing it.
And I loved this conversation. Thank you for tuning into part 1. I hope that you will check out part 2, which is where we get to hear Lauren's top 5 encouraging songs, which are so fascinating, and we have such wonderful conversation around the music that she chose as well. And as a bonus, we get to hear Lauren read one of the poems from her new book, Just Leaves. So I hope you'll join us for part 2. Thank you for listening. Please click on the show notes to learn more about my guest and to listen to their top songs of encouragement. If you have found value in these podcasts, please share the podcast with those you know. Leave a positive review, or support the show at buymeacoffee.com. Sounds of Encouragement is a podcast production of Music Grow LLC, part of growing musicians and teachers everywhere. Sounds of Encouragement is hosted, produced, and edited by Melissa Slocum. To get in touch, contact soundoфencouragement@gmail.com. You can also find Sounds of Encouragement on Clubhouse. Drop in weekly for a dose of personal encouragement. Theme music by Melissa Slocum and Steve Tressler. Music mixed and mastered by Steve Tressler. Thank you to Steve Tressler and Christina Lopriori, who encouraged me to do this in the first place. And remember, I'm here for you, so you can be there for those who need you the most.